if we are taking that people, that the idea of religion is to pay to somehow remember these events, if my theory is, or the theory, the EU general theory is relatively correct on that, then when you step inside a church or step inside a mosque or a synagogue and you look up at the cathedral and you see the stained glass and you see the weird figures and the tumultuous artwork, that is, to me, an interpretation of this forgotten past.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it doesn't make sense to us necessarily. Just like the books of mythology made no sense to the ancient Greeks. They knew who Hera was. They knew this because they've heard enough stories around the campfires, no matter who they were. But to think that the people who were thinking that this was real that made them insane, they were different people, that's an interesting concept, because obviously these people didn't have this stuff happening in the sky anymore. It didn't scare the living bejesus out of them every day. It changes you. Welcome to the June 5th edition of The Electric View. I'm Neil Thompson. Today we have David, Robert, Heather, Richard, Buddy, and a special guest, David Brown. We will be discussing strange rock formations all over the world, why they are there, and how they are formed. Please take a moment to like and subscribe below.
The big point is the narrative is going mainstream, so that's exciting.
I can't believe it myself. I can't believe that Robert Schoch dropped the EU rate.
It was talking all about Anthony Peratt. It was all about Peratt.
Well, it's pretty convincing work. Once you see that it only occurs in high arc energy discharges, high amperage, and of course distance scales the same as time, then you have a general idea, seemingly, how long it takes to draw the next picture in sequence would be showing it going through its form.
David could put in some of his pictures.
Sure, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, this is everyone. This is Dave.
Which, yeah. We just call me DJ, so you get the separation.
Oh, DJ, yeah.
Because I'll get confused.
DJ. Forget we're having two Davids on the
Waka 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 waka.
I do weddings too.
So DJ, and this is Dave Brown. This is Robert's friend.
Hello.
I'm just kidding. Obviously, he's a friend of ours on Facebook. So
the Electric Universe Geology page. He's the poster of a plethora of fabulous shots that, if you have EU eyes, you can just see how things got zapped, zorked, and excavated, deposited. And I just wanted to have him on the show just to give him a chance to show everybody.
Don't we all have a folder like that? I know I do. Just a folder of things that said, I think I called it electrically scarred surfaces. That's what I called it, because that's when I first got into this, it was like, I need proof. I need to look at it, and something tangible. Mm-hmm. It's the first place to go. And, besides me wanting to hear what Robert Schoch and Joe Rogan spoke about, since I'm not going to get that immediately, let's throw.
I highly recommend. It's on the idea page, so I highly recommend checking it out.
Well, let's throw it out there for.
We can go back and forth.
Yeah. So Dave,
instead of the people that are watching the podcast, they just watch our faces. They can actually put some actual footage up while we're talking about Robert Schoch, and we can actually see some information that we're actually talking about.
Right.
Well, I'll put some links up.
I'm sharing my screen, aren't I? Oh, here. Maybe you're not seeing my screen. I'll reshare.
Here, I'll make myself smaller too. There's no need to look at my room.
Yeah.
There we go.
Can you see my screen here?
I can see
Yeah.
your screen. Joe Rogan
Okay.
Experience 1124.
Right.
I didn't watch the whole thing because it was very long and some of it wasn't interesting. Do you know where the interesting bits are?
Oh, we don't have to listen to it. It's just, it's more. I thought the compelling thing is that it's kind of the narrative is going more mainstream. Through this. Joe Rogan has a pretty high level listenership. So
we can also see some of his photographs and pictures. So, Dave, you know how to share the screen?
Yeah. Let's say it. Figured out.
So when did you get into the EU there, sir?
Let's see here. It was about 2011, and it was quite funny. My wife was into a lot of conspiracy theory things, and I grew up in,
Aren't we all?
A religious household, so she was showing me quite a few things that were just kind of at the topic of the 2010-2011 era, and it started getting into. She showed me a lot of things about Egyptian, different questions about what is the pyramids about, and what were the Egyptian gods really about, and that started tweaking our interest, and we came across. I'm not sure if it was Thunderbolts of the Gods or Symbols of an Alien Sky first, but I remember watching both of those, and we just got hooked. For the first time, all of my religious upbringing and all of the scientific knowledge that I had gained throughout my schooling finally connected. Before that, I could never correlate the two. Religion was just so confusing for me. There's so many different aspects of belief systems and cultures across the world. And when I met my wife, her family had a completely different religious background. And culturally speaking, I'm a big European mutt, and she is a Native American, African American mix. So she's got 3 or 4 different types of Native American mixed in with the slave blood. So there was a lot of questions that both of us had in regards to what we were taught in school and how we were raised with our cultural beliefs. And so once we came across the Thunderbolts project, that really solidified everything for me and made me question everything that I believed in, what I knew, even from how our world works with the current government, and why is the culture the way it is? Why is everybody so confused? Why is everyone scared of doomsday? All of these scenarios about the world ending, apocalypse, and all of these things. So it was quite funny where I'd gotten pretty far away from religion, aside from what I do with my job, doing audio-visual installation, which brings me into every type of church you can think of in America. It was about that same time that I started getting into all these videos. So visiting, you had made a comment earlier about going into a church and seeing the stained glass of, depicting creation, depicting all of these events, angels with wings and all of these visual, amazing visuals that you're seeing in stained glass. And then you pair that with the stories of any kind of story. Thunderbolts helped me see a picture where now let me back up. It's a rabbit hole. Well, first of all, the rabbit hole started with an idea that things are making sense. In an archetypal view. I think once David Talbot showed me the archetypes, that's really where I started seeing things different. And that made me bust open the scriptures and start looking at other religions, cultures, comparing all of these things in history. And diving into the Electric Universe, I found Michael Steinbacher. And he had some fantastic videos of the Southwest and, the questions he was posing and his research and going out to these places and visiting and starting to ask these questions, even like the Dolomite problem, and these swirling features and how all of these different minerals are layered throughout the Southwest and what caused that. being raised up in school, it was over millions of years. These plate tectonics have moved around in these funny shapes to smash everything together to make what we see today. But it was always suspect. Fast forward to today, anyway. I've been highly inspired by Michael Steinbacher's work, and before I met Robert and a lot of you fellas here, Michael had died just a few years ago. I'm not sure what year he had passed away, but about that time, Andy Hall was doing a few videos, kind of seeming to carry on his work. There was another guy from Germany that did a EU conference right after Michael passed. And those were things that inspired me to start looking at the geology. Since I'm here in America, I'm kind of in the middle of Texas. I grew up in the area. I've traveled all over the West U.S. I spent about 6 years traveling all over California, Arizona, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, New Mexico. And I've been to the northern portions of Mexico, but all over Texas and Oklahoma. And there were geological things that visually I never saw before. But once I started getting on Google Earth after seeing Steinbacher and Andy Hall, it started making me question things. So I've spent a lot of time on Google Earth, mapping out some locations that I think are of interest. And I just started using the snippet tool on Windows and getting different views of areas and collecting just a ton of photos. I didn't know what I was going to use it for. Thought maybe I would write a paper or create something, but obviously since then I've come across a lot of people that have the same type of interest and a lot of information that I can compare to. So,
I'm really excited to have you on. It's that enthusiasm comes through really, really clearly.
Isn't it nice to find a connection between something that you were learning as a child, but you didn't really give any thought to, and then something that might have had credence, because sometimes it was all the knowledge that some people had, and it was the only thing they were allowed to have, really, those type of works. And the finding some theological stories and then realizing you can just envision the step-by-step sort of, Chinese telephone game that would have occurred to start putting metaphor into things, to start attributing these people's words as something other than what they were trying to say. And we're making up stories as opposed to, because they were basically trying to be scientists. I think that's just wonderful that they were trying to do something. They said, this is important. We don't know why it's important. Okay. I've been told a lot of bad stuff, but we told this is important. Enough to write down everywhere.
Could I break in with the short revelation story? I mean, similar waking up. Really short, but for me, I just, I grew up in a family, the Protestant family. We went to church every Sunday and stuff, and I just accepted it all as true till I was about 16, and then I started thinking about the poor Chinese who weren't going to be saved because they didn't know Jesus, Right. And I was thinking, well, if I were Chinese, would I be smart enough to figure out the truth, given my cultural environment? And then I said, well, wait a minute. I'm in a cultural environment. How do I know I'm hearing the truth?
Right.
And that's the one that started me on skepticism about religion. Anyway, end of story.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Santa Claus is the same way. Once someone should try someone. I mean, I was sorry to be kind of foolish, but you have this belief that your parents told you, and in some way it was to create just a nice, comfortable fantasy around something. But then you're at school and you're confronted with someone who tells you, well, that's not true. it's kind of the same waking up, which is bizarre because it happens at such a young age.
Well, for me, it was, I just started thinking of how long it would take in each house to come down the chimney.
Yeah.
And
a
started
lot.
thinking about,
that's a miracle.
So I started thinking of how many houses there were, and then I started telling my friends there was no Santa Claus, and I got in trouble with their parents.
Right. But then you go the next step where there's all these like the metaphors and the kind of the mythic analogies that go along with it as far as archetypal ideas, and then you're really down the rabbit hole. So, but anyway, that's not to get all young, but Dave, do you have
you and young
some things to share? I'm young at heart.
Yeah.
So do you have any things to share, images to share? That was kind of like what Robert was pointing towards.
Sure, I've got folders and folders of images, or if you like, I could. I've got Google Earth open with a lot of different places mapped. We could just.
If you want to just share, you can just grab the screen from me and then share, and then we'll kind of walk through. I think that'd be really fun.
Yeah, let's try that. Let's see what I got to do here.
I think it's under the call section that says share screens, and then you just go from there.
Okay.
There you go.
Is that you can see my screen now?
Yeah. Yep. There it is.
All right. Fantastic. So, one thing I think I want to ask you guys a question. I brought it up with Neil, or he made a comment on a posting. With the advent of Google Earth, and I want to say something too. I think 10 to 15 years ago, we would have never been able to come this far to be able to validate some of the theories and some of the things that we were bringing up, just with technology. So, before, I don't know how long ago we've had this ability to see in detail satellite images of the Earth. Maybe some of you guys that have been around longer than I have, maybe I'm crazy or not, but it seems like we are in a modern time that we couldn't have proved this before.
Right.
We're not proving anything, but we couldn't have had these kind of comparisons before.
It's a significant shift in ability to perceive things, particularly collectively, like we're doing right now.
Agreed. Right. So one thing I try to show people, and people think I'm just absolutely nuts when I start talking about electric universe, because you have to have a foundation in many different aspects, I think, to really start to grasp it. But one thing something that's caught my mind, and maybe you guys have a differing opinion. And again, I've studied all kinds of ancient cultural texts and whatnot, but to me, it looks like the Earth has literally expanded. And again, that could be a completely different topic, but almost as the U.S. has slid over as it grew larger, separating from a giant continent. But again, I look at the planet as a capacitor that received a ton of charge during one or more events that essentially torqued it and expanded it, along with some crazy plasma discharge, both in the sky and in. So, anyhow, we could get off that topic.
We could.
The expansion. You touched on the expansion idea. We've discussed this quite a bit, and there's quite a bit of advocates of that idea. So you're not alone with that.
Yeah, I try to think of what could be and what couldn't be. So
right.
Anyhow,
your discussion of the of Earth and the way that it tends to behave, like here, just getting into seeing it in this way that you could see all the footprints, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely. I mean, we should have expected it, obviously, because we started looking at Mars and so forth and the moon. Get an idea of what it's going to look like here. And the only difference is that it doesn't have as many shock waves because it didn't have as thick an atmosphere, it seems.
But by the way, just since you're down there, there's the big volcanic event in Guatemala just over the last couple of days. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's and there's supposed to be a big tropical storm coming this week as well. Down. But what always caught me with mythology or even ancient teachings is, down in Mexico they've got Quetzalcoatl, God Quetzalcoatl, which was Venus, and they're always telling about of the ball game between the hero twins, and I believe it's either Mars and Venus or Venus and Mercury. But to them, that was kind of the main deity was Quetzalcoatl, Venus. And I can just imagine if there was a trailing plasma tail of a cometary being of that size, it dragging behind it some sort of over-ionized aurora, that could be altering this landscape during those times, or at least in past close. One thing, I grew up in the Texas area, so there's always been a place. I lived in Austin for about 7 years.
Oh, wow. I did that for a little bit.
I never got to go over there, but I always heard of a place that I wanted to visit, and it was kind of a sacred spot for the Native Americans called Enchanted Rock. And this is one of them I took photos of and posted on the site for you guys. This rock is just this huge granite dome.
Wow.
And it's on the axis of what they call the Llano uplift. So if we zoom out here, Texas, I'm not sure if you can see it yet, but you'll start to see. Let me correct this. You can see this ridge line right here.
Uh-huh.
And it goes all the way up I-35. It takes it all the way up into Oklahoma.
Right.
And right as it hits Oklahoma, it starts to spin off again. So this was one area of interest for me. So we've got these figure patterns here. We have this large uplift dome here, and then the elevation actually decreases as we get higher up in this area. But one interesting thing I found from another guy was, where did it go? All right, so we have Enchanted Rock.
There's caverns nearby, I see.
Oh, there's all kinds of caverns. Some of them I've been into. They're quite elaborate. So we've got this one dome uplift on kind of the axis of that whole area, and this is supposed to be an ancient fault line that runs through Texas, right? Now, if we follow that, now I'll show you some other things in a moment too, but what I wanted to point out is if we follow this, here's Enchanted Rock, that granite dome uplift, we follow this fault line all the way over here, and we follow this swirling pattern all the way to where this mountain ridge is. Then we've got another area somebody pointed me to called Stone Mountain, and they said, wow, Enchanted Rock looks just like Stone Mountain. And if we go to Stone Mountain, what do we have? We have another granite uplift, the same type of uplift. And there's not anything around this.
I got to go to the toe on this one. Okay.
Yeah.
This is something that bothers me about geology. Only now that I'm hearing it come from you, and I mean it nothing. It just so you've hit the nerve. There's a difference between hill or rock or slab even and uplift. Is it predetermines the method in which it is doing its thing, and obviously looking at these things and thinking with an electrical idea, that's not how I envision it at all. But it's like fault line. It's another one. We know there's a feature there, but what does it really mean?
Just because of the naming.
Yeah, the nomenclature or whatever is it's obfuscates, or just like the solar wind. It's just wholly inadequate to describe what might be going on. It
throws the visualization of what it is and it locks it as the truth.
Well, yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying. Exactly, yeah. But anyway, go on, Dave. I'm sorry. It was just...
No, sure. Yeah, no problem. It's just, I hadn't seen anything else similar to Enchanted Rock until I saw this. And, I looked at it, and obviously it looks very similar. But then when I looked at its location, it then kind of stuck out, because I see patterns everywhere. So what I try to do is look at the microscopic and the macroscopic scale. So when I zoom out, I notice it's again at a pivot point of this whole side of the swirl on the eastern United States. Again, is it related? I think so, but I'm not too sure exactly what it is. But to me, it just seems really interesting that we've got that same type of system here, and then we've got this type of geology, which again they say is the plates pushing against America, forcing these ridge lines, these mountain ranges to occur. But when I start looking at this type of thing, and I start zooming into places like this, I don't know that these are fold lines.
So they're very defined. Yeah. Uh-huh.
We have lots of circular swirling things. We have lines that bend back and forth, that fold, that separate from rivers. It seems like wherever water is, these things just end and terminate. And looking at like Billy Elverton's experiments, he had one that had the positive and the negative, and then he had a stream of water, and they had dirt on the ground, and then I think they were doing dust from the top. And it was interesting to see how, with the different electrical potentials, that mineral either falling from the sky was gathering together, and then also what it did to the existing mineral that was on the surface. And again, in this type of situation, I can only imagine something so catastrophic that it's not just in one place in the world, it's engulfing the entire planet at the same time. And I guess that's where I'm coming from. And
are you seeing those points that you're bringing as pinion points, kind of? Or would they be an axis of this curvature that you're showing, or
yes,
kind of a driving point?
Yes. So I would say I like to call it an axis point, or you've got this big curvature here. So if we've got a storm, if you guys have watched any large storm systems move across the United States, it depends on how the jet stream is, and generally weather comes in down here, the jet stream comes down, and then usually wraps back up. Hits Texas and wraps back up. So some of the cloud formations and storm systems that I've seen follow these similar types of patterns. So if this is a kind of a recurring trail off of something that happened thousands of years ago, with how the Earth is still spinning and wobbling, and the movement of air and whatnot moves around, I see a lot of that happening still with today's storm systems. Maybe we could look up some of those recent storm systems, and maybe you would see it. But pairing that with what I see visually with Aurora Borealis, it moves kind of in a snake-like pattern, and it weaves back and forth and up and down. And sometimes it turns right back in on itself and has a really sharp curve, and then whips back out. But I think what everybody looks at right now is the 2D perspective. We look at a flat map, we look at the top layer of clouds, and we can't really see a 3D version of how the atmosphere is really moving around.
Right. The Null School app is really, really great. So, just we'll look at it afterwards, but it's pointing in the direction that you're suggesting here.
I see just from this alone, and thank you for bringing it to my attention. Can you stop over Baton Rouge there? Just back her up a little and look over just slightly. There. This right here is an example of a falsification, which is a wonderful falsification. You have this nice swirling stuff doing its stuff, going down through Arkansas and then to Mississippi, through Greenville, Vicksburg, and going down that way with that curve, meeting up with perhaps maybe given the circumstances, I would say at least ionic winding, if nothing else, almost going to glow mode. I can see some evidence of the ripping over there in Alabama, but we'll talk about that in a second. So here comes this other strike that goes right across that Shreveport 49 through Alexandria down, and crosses right across that, by the way, and look and see it goes right through Baton Rouge out to the coast. And
what do we have?
That's not... Water doesn't do that. Water does not cross another path. If the only thing that crosses another path is the same reason why Europa looks so messed up. You can't make Europa with cracks because you have trails that are going across it and then overlapped with other trails. And we have similar situations in northern Canada where two rivers cross each other, and that just can't happen. And this is something that you just have to think about it for a second and you realize it's true. And it's one of those very damning things, just like those ridges up the edge there that you were talking about, just like those straight lines that across the ocean. You know?
Another interesting thing, Neil, is down here where this ends, these are all salt domes. These are all salt domes, and they do a lot of underwater fracking and oil extraction from the Gulf in this area.
That is surprising.
This is also, in some of my research, you know, at least scientists say that this area here was caused by a comet, a giant impact. That they say this is what ended the dinosaurs. But,
right.
The Alvarez hypothesis.
Yes. So I'm not sure that's the case. I can't rule it out.
I would seriously debate it, given what we know.
You know, another cool thing of mention, this whole area, the Ozarks, kind of this crazy railing system here, this is one of the prime places to go hunt for crystals. There are crystal mines galore. My wife's old geology teacher, which she stayed in touch with, he's just got crystals covering his house. You can hardly walk through his house. But this is the area to go to, unless it's up in Canada, if you wanted to go find crystals in America. So it's very interesting that there's a lot of mountain ranges, and the hot springs are in this area as well. But if you just zoom in, it's some interesting terrain, to say the least.
I can envision that area having a current going across it. You can see some of the double pairings and stuff like that. And the interference pattern that the right-hand rule makes as the magnetic fields pull and twist this as it goes down. But at the same time, this would be like not quite like it has points on the outside where it's touching, like it is in an arc mode where it's ripping little pits and stuff like that. But it's not a full arc, if you know what I mean. It's more glowing like fire going across the landscape, able to make patterns and interfere and so forth, but like an astroblem here.
Yeah, I could see something touching down here and affecting this landscape.
See, I dislike when I hear geologists talk now. I really have, like, I was looking up what Uluru was over in Australia, and they had this idea that these rocks over here and this the Uluru rock is linked underground by this massive U shape of bent land, because they see only erosion to have made this, and then the bending and curvature of the land from an even flat fall, which is just, imagine the power you'd need to keep on bending the land like this all the time. You know, like it strains credulity. So I picture, obviously in a more electrical interpretation, but you can see where the well, anyway, it doesn't matter. You can see where I was going with that, but
yeah, this almost looks like this is, you know, where it's deposited, and it's a negative force here, and then a positive force here, and we've got this little dome that's almost in the same shape as this area that's missing.
Well, these would have been crawling. See, just like in my opinion, they would have been. They wouldn't stay the same. Picture one of Billy Elverton's experiments, okay, or Garrett Hill's experiments, but across the landscape. Now watch it go, and you'll notice that the land moves, like the mountains were twisting and everything like that, and they were rumbling. The whole place was obviously a horrible disaster, but they would have been sort of semi-sliding with themselves, and that would have been the same effect as a lot of the land probably was, and you can really see it in the scablands around where you can see that it's not just a mesa that was etched out because of an EDM, but there's more of a deposition right beside an excavation, like where it just basically has a loop and it's just grabbing stuff and putting it beside itself and then eating itself away. So these land that you see on the ground that you see eroded, well, that would have been electrically eroded, but it could have been laid down just moments earlier, like literally minutes earlier. It could have been like raining down, and then just the ass end of it comes through and just is a big negative charge and starts ripping it up and starts moving this terrain around. So this is like, and I'm only speaking from someone you could see this in a laboratory. The forces are there. So if they can do this, then, you have to, there's no reason to think that the slow ponderance of time needs to be there anymore. I mean, for some things, surely, but, obviously we have no idea. Like, it's just a fairy tale. Like to say that the Earth is 6.5 or 4.6 billion years. I mean, I really have no idea. I really can't tell its age now, especially when you start throwing out isotopic radiocarbon dates and stuff like that. When you start throwing all those out the window, I don't know. So
that's an interesting thing. Richard, I don't know if you feel like chiming in here, but one of the statements that Robert Schoch made yesterday in that interview is the accuracy that they can get in timing with ice cores. And
what did he say?
He said you get down to an accuracy of weeks with a 10,000-year span.
Wow.
Well, that doesn't make any sense. I mean,
yeah.
It seems to me that if ice cores are valid, then what happens is that because of the fact that half of the year is in sun and half of the year is in darkness at the poles, it would make sense that there would be that layers would reflect. Each year you'd see some kind of a deposit layer from, say the difference between the light and dark part of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So what you'd be getting is you could count the years. But I don't see how you'd be counting much in between the years.
Right. They're doing this, the driest, he's focused on that area, but he said, he very, very directly making that statement. It's definitely worthy of trying to find the validity of that statement.
Yeah. Well, did he give any arguments for?
Yeah, I'll dig it up and I'll share it with you. And I haven't had a chance to look into any support for that statement, but it was kind of shocking to me that he said that kind of accuracy.
I've heard that they can be accurate, assuming, of course, that there has been no great warming that would obviously cause melting, which would sort of destroy the whole layering idea. But with enough samples, I'm sure that you could get a pretty good, if you took 300 samples over a wide enough area and throw out the outliers and start working with what you have, I can envision that you get pretty accurate over time if you can start nailing down certain things like the Roman Empire or, the Industrial Revolution or whatever.
One of the things that, to me, gives some credibility to the ice cores is the regularity of the patterns. It's like there aren't any big disjoint. I mean, if there was a big melting, then it'd be like things wouldn't line up. You'd have a line going along, and suddenly it'd be somewhere else. You know what I mean?
Right.
It'd be disjunctions in the record, but the record seems to have a lot of continuity to it. like the having the ice ages, having a cycle of about 100,000 years. Mm-hmm. You don't suddenly have suddenly there's only 50,000 years before the ice ages. I mean, that doesn't seem to happen in the record. So internal consistency seems to be there.
Mm-hmm. Of course, I still have questions about some of their, glacial theory and some of their landforms they say are caused by glaciers and so forth. But, it's certainly there is more of a coherence there than there is with regards to landscapes in general. I mean, you can find literally geology is nothing but a series of anomalies where nothing looks like something else. I mean, you can see some places that you go, oh, this reminds me of this place, but a lot of places just are so uniquely their own, like they've been mangled, and the supposed sedimentary layers are, scoured off in some locations and piled upside down in others.
But I mean, in fairness, if the only mechanisms they know about are the movement of glaciers, erosion, and comets, if that's all the only tools in their toolbox, then they try to make it fit.
Right.
Oh, yeah, I try not to be too hard on them either.
And then once we add in electricity, you say, wait a minute, guys, now we got to reevaluate each phenomenon and see with this new one, which is the most likely mechanism.
Right. Oh, and which type of electricity?
Right.
Because
this is the beauty of like just this kind of groundbreaking work that Billy's doing, etc. It's like it's pointing in the way of like, okay, since you could do it on the small scale and get pretty, like what are the ratios that cause this, and what are the materials that cause this, and really it's kind of a big open, just sudden, this wide open door for exploration on how would you simulate this with material in a lab, in a plasma lab.
Yeah. I want to. This may be off topic, but I wanted to go back a bit to the expanding Earth thing.
Yeah.
If you think about how could the Earth expand, one is by the deposition of new material. But the other one, if you look at Wall's theory of gravity, which suggests that planets are hollow.
Mm-hmm.
Or have a percentage chance of being.
Well, because you've got all these, the positive part of the dipole pointing toward the center, and pretty soon they're going to repel each other, which would indicate it might be hollow. Then if that were true, if that is true, then you could, if there were a distance, a difference in the intensity of the charge involved in these things, then you could see that the repelling force might be greater with a greater charge, which would push the balloon, think of the Earth as a balloon. It would push it further out, expand it, just because of the change in the electrical energy.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the
rate of flow. Right?
That did not escape me. In fact, that was the basis of my paper that I made. The paper that I wrote not too long ago for EU 2016, I think.
Oh.
And
so I'm not crazy. It might be a what do they call it? A folie à deux.
Well, yeah, I guess, yeah. Well, he basically the situation is that if you say that they are generally made like geodes or concretions, and we can make those in the lab, and we have made them, but at small scales like arc welding dust, or as big as a few millimeters across in Vemisat labs by CJ Ransom there. And he managed to make these, and he cut a bunch of them open, and he found it was 40%. 40% of them were hollow. So if that goes if that holds true, then and that seems to with our planets, which ones have magnetic fields and which ones don't. Does a hollow core require? Is that required to make that happen? I was wondering if that was the case. And
but the forces are way different. I mean, in a geode, it's not that you have a gravitational hollowness. I mean, that would be more like the electrical charge vaporizes the center.
No,
would be more like
they're actually all based off of if it holds true. If Don Scott's right, then it all holds true that it would be all of them are the exact same force called a pinch. That's what they different scales, of course. A planet is just a pinch. It's that's just how it would be made. A magnetically constricted sphere, and it would tend to be slightly oblate, which is why you see the I think Oedipus or IAEPTUS, whatever that moon is, that has Iapetus. Thank you. That has a ridge.
Freudian slip.
Thank you, Oedipus. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Anyway, and it has a ridge across it, and there's a Pan, of course, has an extended ridge, and this is we're slightly oblate, but nothing too much. I wasn't really going into specifics with that because concretions and geodes are probably made in similar but different form. But the end result is that it was a pinched sphere that is being made. Now, you were right that the forces involved in the center would be at least equal to the forces across the entire surface of the Earth, because whatever's happening above in the ionosphere is hitting that plate, which is the Earth, and it's not letting charge go through, but it will induce. And this is where you get the earthquakes, and this is also where there must be another layer underneath that, an inner layer, which is positive. And it's quite positive or plausible that the inner surface, should it be hollow, would carve itself out with a twisting torrent of plasma, and it would all that positive electricity, so to speak, on one surface would push it outwards and expand it, especially if it changed, like move from one place to another, like from the domain of, say, one planet and to the domain of this star, from one star to another star. And if that was to happen, that could be the result, for example.
But I think, though, that what you're talking about is very different than what Wall's talking about. He's talking about these dipoles within each atom. And it's a gravitational phenomenon, according to Wall, whereas you're talking like a pinch phenomenon is really different than that. Well, I'm not saying one's right and one's wrong. I think they're kind of apples and oranges.
Well,
reasons for hollowness.
The gravity, I just don't. Honestly, I just don't think he thought it through enough, to be perfectly honest. But he's not wrong in what his theory entails. Basically, it absolves the singular or the singularity equation for the center of any given mass. Basically, instead of having to work it like Einstein and just imagine a curve that goes inwards all the way to the core, which would be the most pressure, it could function much more like a geode or something like that, or like a concretion, which is hollow. It could be hollow in the middle, because of the fact that it has the forces more along the surface area where these bridges are, where the alignment occurs. And also, it would act like an arch. It would not collapse necessarily. There's no reason it should, because it would be it's a sphere. It's it naturally the entire force around the outside of the planet is preventing it from collapsing. If you think about it.
Okay.
But anyway, I was just taking this is what Don Scott was saying when he was referring to, for example, stars, and how stars are just like, there's no difference between a star, between that and a gas giant, between a gas giant and a,
right.
one of the planets our size, or a moon.
Thing. And probably one of the things that is facing us as far as gaining clarity, which is always a challenge, is it's kind of an area that we've found ourselves focusing on, but it's and then Ito being, involved this week and in the States, yes, in this conference, etc. But that circuit between the sun and the earth, and what are the effects of that circuit, and at this point,
he brings nuclear chemistry into it in a different way, like a way I love it.
There's all these different flavors of what this process is, and it's interesting because you can take it from the 500,000 light year point. Excuse me for the extrapolation, right? Like a 50,000 foot view, helicopter view, and you keep on going down, and the ideas divert from each other, and they become somewhat contradictory, but I mean, the ultimate tying thread is that there's a circuit between the sun and the earth.
Well, there's nothing, I try to be fair in my description. I think that what they're entailing with a lot of different types of stars that we would see, it's basically, a current per square meter at the surface, and right down to where we're at Earth. Now, admittedly, once you get to certain points, you're going to start having nuclear reactions start happening. That's a given. I mean, Earth even has it happening in lightning, so we know that it happens. But if this is,
So this is a transmutation.
A transmutation, exactly. So what happens when that gets going? It's not my thing. I think of things as
changes the whole model.
Well, right. No, it just means that not every single piece of material has to be brought out in a catastrophic way. Not every piece of ore had to be made in a huge kaboom. There could be a slow cooking process to it, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
how would that happen?
Heather, did you make it?
How would that happen?
How would the slow cooking process work?
Well,
hi. Yeah. I'm sorry. I was muted. I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's all good.
Problem.
No problem at all.
Thanks for joining us.
Hello, Eddie.
So I was just Edwin had a wonderful talk a little while ago when we were having a discussion about the insides of the Earth and how what is a mature star. Certain processes would be endothermic and certain processes would be exothermic, and how would that change the surface over time? Those type of things. I think that I think that that's where those are things that I would not normally consider, because thinking coming from an electrical perspective, I want to go, just give me a metal ball, stick it on a string, and cover it with dust, and I'm good to go, and I can start making landscapes.
Well, I mean, from the electric point of my understanding, from the electric point of view, is there's no such thing as so much as a mature. I mean, in the standard model, stars go through a cycle of the collapsing and using up their hydrogen, and so there's young stars and old stars. Whereas in the electrical model, the only part where young and old comes in is like in the redshift, like in a new galaxy.
Well, actually,
but a star could suddenly change it. If the current coming into it suddenly changed, the star would suddenly change.
Correct. No, I'm not denying that. I think what Edwin was noticing, that certain reactions would be self-reinforcing once the heat got going, and they would facilitate moving. Like, for example, making a lot of sulfur from oxygen. Two oxygens together make a sulfur, apparently, And he all the way up to a certain point at around iron, and that's when it stops, and then it gets harder, and you have to pour more energy into it, apparently. And this is what he was talking about, and then he was wondering if this is why the surface gets kind of iron-like. We're seeing an iron surface on the sun. The sun has an iron surface is a website, I think. Anyway, and then bringing that around full circle, are we seeing mountains? Is that what we were seeing across the surface of the sun? And why does it stop at iron? And of course, it would also concentrate the magnetic field, because once you start getting iron involved, especially soft iron, it just concentrates the flux. So you're going to have, like for example, Mars is just more of a rocky body with some magnetic crustal displacement, and that's it. But if it had an iron surface, like a lot of iron in it, it would have the potential for glowing more, because there'd be more electric current traveling through it, because it'd be concentrating the magnetic lines of force more. Even though I know that the magnetic lines of force are not real, I'm just saying, the flux would be stronger. And then we were wondering, maybe that's why there's certain parts of the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram that have like white dwarfs down to one side and red giants a little bit off to another side. And we were, debating on whether or not this could account for those discrepancies, for example.
Well, let me comment a little bit on the magnetic thing. So like if you have a coil, electrical coil, it has some kind of electrical magnetic field, but then if you put an iron core in it, it suddenly gets much stronger, right?
Right.
So my thesis about, I did as sort of one of those space news things, is that the magnetic field of the sun is really due to it's really the magnetic field of the incoming Birkeland currents. So it's like this. The sun is an electromagnet, and then when it reverses, that's because the relative strength, say coming in from the south, suddenly becomes a little greater than the one from the north, and it's going to reverse. But it's going to be a big reversal because of the iron, right? In other words, there's a small difference between the two fields. The one that dominates is the one that magnetizes the iron, and that's why you get a big shift. Mm-hmm. And does that make sense?
It's like an
expressing myself well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like an amplification of the.
Yeah, so it would have been like a tiny perturbation. You sort of have a zero field for a while or something, but because of the iron, whichever one is larger, magnetizes the iron, and so suddenly you get a huge swing. Mm-hmm. From one polarity to the other.
We were talking about the current wouldn't stop. Of course, the current would not end, but the magnetic field, the direction of the magnetic flux would change dominance. But it would have hysteresis, which is another thing. I was wondering if that might play a role, because it will tend to resist this motion. There's a point in like soft iron's really good for switching polarities whenever you tell it to, but the Earth is not perfect. So
that's a weird thing. I just read across that. I don't know if there's any tie between the two, and it's funny with it. But piezo, the piezoelectric effect exhibits a very similar thing going on. But
explain that, would you?
Yeah, David? Well, yeah, the hysteresis on piezoelectric, what Neil was bringing up. I just ran across that, and it was like there was like a tie-in. It's one of these things where it just kind of struck me that these seem like there's a parallel effect, and I need to dive further into it. And I'm sure many people are much more familiar with this than I am, but it's compelling to me that it seems a similar type of action going on.
Well, ignorant me, what is the piezoelectric?
Oh, like the relation with a crystal. It was often quartz, but they use ceramics now. If you put an electric charge on it, there's a compression, right, or an expansion depending on the voltage. I'm sorry, you put a voltage across this piece of material, depending on the voltage, there's either an expansion or a contraction, right? Now, the dual is true too, where if you put pressure on it, it creates a voltage, depending on whether it's pulling or pushing.
Uh-huh.
So, but it exhibits a hysteresis. That's interesting. So, anyway.
Okay.
In a nutshell.
Okay, I should have known that. But go ahead.
Yeah. So anyway, there's an interesting parallel there, but it may be anyway, it may be off the beaten track there. I come in from left field occasionally.
Well, since we didn't even let Dave talk so far, let's let him get back to showing some stuff.
Enjoying the travels though. The travels you've been taking us on have been very very compelling. It's an interesting thing that happens when we do this, because there's a little bit of a it's like you're watching the TV without the sound on, and it's got some type of meditative effect to it.
This is often I just poke around and look for things to zoom in on, and then I'll find something. There was one thing that I found early on. Well, let's say sometime last year, and this isn't a good example here, but it's more so in the mineral deposits. So, like in the Midwest, if we go into some of these areas, let's just see if it happens when I zoom in, and particularly with tree lines. Let's see here. One thing that I kind of caught notice of is trees will grow in certain patterns or areas, and I'm looking at it as in material being layered in a fashion that something rich enough to be able to support a tree or a bush kind of follows the shape of it. Let's just see if I could find a perfect example, but I don't have it.
I'm catching it there.
There was something in. This is not a good example.
Although that's very interesting.
But
it's a nice way to look. It's a nice way to look at it, though. Just not only that rock type of formations, but like how the life responds to like potential action.
What's there? I know Texas has 7 different types of forests. We have pretty much every environment in here, and each area grows a little bit differently depending on what's there, what type of tree and what type of plant life grows. Which also, the other day I was looking up the petrified forest in Arizona, and it made me think when I came across a photo of shelter that somebody had built just using the petrified wood that they could find. Because there was nothing around there. It's just pure desert land.
Mm-hmm.
And the native elders speak that there used to be millions of people in their tribe covering this entire area until some natural disaster happened in their history that killed most of their tribe. And this is prior to anybody from Europe coming over.
Mm-hmm.
And they teach of these legends.
Right.
So, I base a lot of kind of my findings and my passion of this on native mythology too. So,
it's a good
what's
source.
Read on the blue kachina?
The blue kachina. There you go.
Yeah. By the way, is this what's happening?
Well, I mean, I attribute a lot of this disaster over here, a lot of these desert lands. My beliefs was I listened for their truths that they tell in their legend. How do they teach their children growing up? That it once used to be a very livable, thriving land, green, lush land, where there was all kinds of food until all these different weird stories come up. And they usually assign it to a beautiful woman that turned evil, or a two-faced deity, somebody that came and destroyed the land because of whatever reason.
Spirit.
Yeah. And
yeah. Mm-hmm. No,
that's Venus.
Oh, yeah. The Ishtar, Kali type visage.
Yeah.
Beautiful, long flowing hair, and then suddenly an arcing dragon.
Helen of Troy. I don't know why I find that funny.
Actually,
okay, back to David.
Back to David. We'll lose it. We'll lose it.
Out the weeds, quick.
I think also something that sealed the deal for me was, all of my experience seeing the petroglyphs around the Southwest, and things like Kokopelli, and all of these things that people attributed to alien life forms, and they're saying the Indians painted all of these things because they had such an imagination and whatnot. And I never could get with that. But then when I came across, I think it was by Anthony Peratt, and it was, I believe, called The High Occurrence of Z-Pinch Aurora. It basically was his research of taking all of the petroglyphs that he could find around the world and geolocating them and the positioning of them to where he would see these Peratt columns and things that he was recreating in the laboratory. And reading that article scientifically, to me, was the nail in the coffin to all the things I had been researching into. You had posted that somewhere yesterday. I'm trying to recall the exact title of that for anybody that's interested in
the occurrence of high current or high amperage discharges, Z-pitch discharges in the upper atmosphere, according to antiquity or something like that. I will link it. It'll be down below. It'll be down below. I get to say that now.
Yeah. To me,
it will be down there.
People's research goes far and far beyond. I've got my own way of thinking, and others do too. But I think when you start to put the pieces together, I've always tried to make educated guesses in my life of collect as much information as I can on a subject and rule out what just seems like garbage, and what all together could be truth. So that's why I do not dismiss what the Native Americans have to say, because this was their land before anybody else was here. I look at
much deeper respect for nature too, for sure, as a culture.
Absolutely. And that's something that I grew up with, and again, it's kind of always made me just look at our modern day and what we think is acceptable and what rules we should follow. I don't think humans as a whole do a good job.
Not these days.
Well, we do say we do say that, but let's be honest. There's megaliths in America. There's megaliths in Brazil. There's megaliths in Canada. So, if we are to use the electric universe as a model, perhaps we could use it to find, perhaps maybe where are the best places to look to find something that might be still there but yet buried.
Mm-hmm. Well, Neil, there was one, I believe it was, let's see here, it was another show that you were on, and there was a question about Mount Rushmore, and you had pulled up an image of what Mount Rushmore looked like prior to carving in the president's faces.
Actually, DJ does it.
Yeah, we were. Oh. It's a collective effort. We're both.
Okay, you guys were. Sorry, I apologize.
No, it's fine.
You had made mention of this whole little range here, and the image that you found prior to them carving this out just looked way suspect to me. And there's some places where they call them the Four Elders, or they have different names for some of these mountain ranges that they do hold some sort of sacred meaning to. Mm-hmm. Devil's Mountain, the Black Elk Peak, the Black Hills. A lot of this area, they have a lot of significance to in what their beliefs are.
Yeah.
And you start to read those stories, and to me, it paints the picture of what they were seeing visually with plasma or ionized winds. Again, I don't think it's all electricity. I think there was a lot of other things going on, but I think that was the foundation of it.
I mean, for them to go in and put that thing right in the center of that sacred ground, I thought was pretty.
But doesn't that Mount Rushmore you were showing, isn't it a bit like those two other raised granite forms you were talking about, the one in Texas and the other one?
No, these aren't domes. Those are dome uplifts.
Oh, I see.
I mean, these look like these are.
Now that's cross hatching.
But I do see a lot of cross hatching.
Well, could they have been domes that then got sliced around?
Sure. I mean, a feature that I see on a lot of these rock formations is they have these kind of circular pieces sticking up from the edges. And I can imagine if I look at a tornado system that has multiple vortexes trailing behind it, if you've got a really hot ionized wind, you look at storm systems today and you have a cold front hitting a low pressure, high pressure with cold air hitting hot, moist air. Robert had asked, how do I get my photos? And essentially, I Google Earth around until I find an area. Sometimes when you get close enough, it will list something that already has photos from somebody that did a geotag.
Right.
That's essentially where I get a lot of.
It's a really exciting thing because all of a sudden you start looking at things with a new paradigm, and then it becomes this just really, really large area of adventure and exploration. So.
I like to look at the process of how these materials were laid down, because I see all kinds of cross hatching and sections that appear to move in one direction, but then it's got a mineral layer that moves in an opposite direction of how these formations are working, and that's the interesting part for me.
Well, it was laid down. It was laid down before. If I was to be a betting person, you could tell a lot from looking at it now. Like it was laid down, and ionic winds came over it for an extended period of time, and I mean glowing. They were, and they were enough to induce a secondary current, the cross-hatching effect. As something goes one way, it induces a current at 90 degrees, so it goes across it, and what you saw there, the little eddies, that's totally on par. It's off the top, but down a little bit to the one side, and it could be on the trailing end. Totally. You could also see that it was shattered in a few places. So that means it was hard enough at the time that it could be shattered, probably from the vibration, because it was the supersonic winds will cause shocked terrain. And then you can see that it was also experiencing the ionic pitting that we were talking about, because you can see other parts where it reconnected, so it somehow had to be in a semi. It's not fluid, but it can cover up some of these damaged areas. So that tells me that it was a hard chunk that was being weathered by supersonic winds, and then that is what was left of it. That is what is left of it, actually.
Yeah, like these pieces here. What do you think of this, Neil? Do you think this again was deposited and then etched out, or this seems to be pulled from above, almost like the material was stretched out of the earth or pulled out of the earth?
That actually wouldn't surprise me either. But the reason I mentioned on that particular one is because of the cross hatching itself, and the fact that it goes at 90 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
It's not piled up randomly. You can get the piled up randomly effect. That does happen. See, if you look at this from above, you could see what you're looking at.
Yeah, this almost looks like some hoodoo formation here.
That I was going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of a lot of. To me, it's like a vortex is disconnecting right there. you know, as the winds are retreating or lifting upward, and it's just dropping the deposited material there as it lifts up. Again, I could be wrong.
Well, that's the thing. Going up or down, it's hard to tell. Like, I mean, when you're going here, because you can see where the original land was, how it was laid down, and then you can see what was taken away, and generally how. Other parts, I have no idea how it was. It's too chaotic to have been built up in a certain way. It had to be built up. It had to be built up because you can see that it responded to, water, other things like that. It had to move.
And I almost see this area here almost looks as I like to look at the ranges and how the rivers flow. To me, I almost see kind of a swirling motion this way as it seems to build up higher and higher as we go around to this peak here. And I can almost see a dip in this middle portion here. You know, you've got a center point, and then you've got the outside ridge that swirls around.
I can envision that was something then, and then the fire wind came across the top of it. Because you can see a lot of the direction that has a particular determined direction. Yeah. This means that, in my opinion, it was laid down, could have been laid down just moments before, but in this case, it could have been, there for a while. I mean, it was hard enough to be shocked. So, and it continues off, and it has a predominant direction that goes out to more towards the right, maybe slightly south.
Looks like it came down. Yeah. And then we've got this line here that completely separates out, and then we've got the Badlands over here. So it's all mountainous area. Then flat plains almost. Then it gets real nasty out here.
Crazy.
And some of you folks have been out to the Badlands, correct?
I think
Robert?
Lily was. I haven't been. Robert's from Utah.
Okay.
We're sorry, Robert.
Sorry, Robert.
Oh, that's nice. You see, the features that go across landscapes for any length of time should be fairly damning.
This looks like the Billy Overton had the sand vibration experiment that he did, and this to me looks like an earth vibration made this. I don't know. Could it have been winds from above or a shock wave from something else? To me, it kind of just looks like a vibrating ripple.
Yeah. I mean, once the thing where you get like this added action is if you do accept the fact that there's just a high energy plasma event, you're going to get the material rocking and rolling for sure.
Well, if it were temporarily liquefied, then you could get just waves on the liquid.
Mm-hmm. And that happens during earthquakes. Like it's a big problem in a few cities. Like for example, Vancouver is mostly on a floodplain, so you have to basically, regulations require that any building have to be built 30 feet into the ground until it's on bedrock. Those type of problems.
Yeah,
that's certainly liquefaction.
Yeah, exactly. Fluidization of a Newtonian solid. That's what happens to the ground when it happens. Or when we were talking about the moon crater, and was it a vibration above that actually was turning the crater, turning the ground semi-liquid for just an instant, and then re-solidifying also instantaneously and leaving these types of marks.
That would be something very something we should look into, actually.
Getting back to kind of this big giant continental swirl. I've been exploring up in Canada lately too, and not physically, but just on Google Earth. And with energy, to me, you've always got positive, negative, you've got a binary of some sort. And I used to look at America as, maybe this was the opposite sides here of energy. But, as far as how it would connect on a global scale, one question I have is if what you guys have heard about Hudson Bay, because this is supposedly another comet impact crater. But to me, that never stuck with me. What I see is it being carved out, and this being a remnant of what was on the inside of that storm that carved that out, and this being kind of the other half to what was going on over here.
An opposite, if as it were.
Kind of an opposite. You've got something that's excavating while something is, or not even an opposite. I don't think these two were connected, but you've got something simultaneously going on at the same instant.
Well, Andy would say that they were connected because there's basically what happens is that inside the atmosphere, especially if you compressed it, it would become very noticeable that you'd have loops. There's some cross hatching. See what I'm talking about? Look at that. But you have loops inside loops inside loops. You'd have the Hadley cells, which would have their own little spiraling loops going around. And then as you compress that, it would be inducing other loops, which would inducing other loops, which is why the cross hatching occurs in the first place. So to imagine then that the removal of material from one location and the deposit in a big ring being what seemed to happen in Canada is generally opposite to what occurred in the American Southwest. So the Northeast versus Southwest. And then but it also has this mountain range that goes through it, whereas they have waterways that go through it. So it's just an idea, but I can visualize stuff like that. If you want to see something else that I don't know if that is, but if you want to go over here to go down to Prince Edward Island there, which is there you go.
The real Prince Edward Island.
That is correct. but zoom out a bit. And you can see how it almost looks like there's a cometary impact, and notice how there's a swirl there, and notice the islands behind it. There's, and of course the way that Cape Breton has all these elongations to it, and that they call Cape Breton the Rock, but also they call Newfoundland, which is just north of it, the Rock. So I don't know which rock is, more important, but they used to put. It used to be a really big deal because that's how you get into the St. Lawrence Seaway. You'd have to go along the coast and then sail across into the Seaway to get down to Toronto and Montreal and stuff. So they put a fort, the Fortress of Louisbourg there. The French had a fort at the point, and they could shoot their cannons at anything that went by.
So I noticed all over Canada, there's a lot of this pitting. There's tons of lakes, and lots of pitting in the geology there. Oh wow, look at this. And I was always told that was from a glacier that just ground out the ground, and that the ice age lasted for quite some time, and it's since melted away, and that's where we got our oceans and such. But I've noticed that same type of action happening. Let's take for example, we have all of this crazy cross hatching and just significant hitting in the ground. It's also over in West Canada as well. Let's get this. There you go. I was exploring in this area.
Oh, yeah.
And there is just significant pitting everywhere. But you can see a lot of that same kind of swirling shape happening over here. If you zoom in, you can just start to see how it moved around. But what I was going to say is, all the way down in Florida has the same attributes. I don't know if you guys have looked at Florida, but there is interesting geology here too. So their lines look like it's just been etched out. So we just have, here's something where you've got...
they actually are very similar. Up north in all those areas, it's almost all tundra, which is basically frozen swamps.
Okay.
Which is one of those weird things that when they're talking about ice core samples and stuff, it's like, what's it like up there? And you're like, well, there's lots of trees, and if you go further than the trees, it is just peat, and it's just, I mean, it's literally, there's no way through it unless you have a specialized vehicle. Like it could be 10 feet thick, it could be 20 feet thick, and it's frozen. If it's warm out, like above zero, you're in serious trouble. If it's frozen, it's just land.
Better get some caribou skin.
Well, I don't think I'd be hoofing it. It'd be kind of annoying and rough and stuff. I'd snowmobile the whole time, I'm sure.
Yeah, but I try to imagine what's going on here, because you have the same edge line that comes down out in the ocean portion, which again, maybe the sea has risen, maybe this used to be land that was available, but you have these just sharp cutouts, and every time I see a hurricane come through, I just imagine if that hurricane just had a little bit of electricity, some fire, something that could remove and deposit. I see these
scalloping.
Yeah, kind of a scalloping everywhere. But then you have that same feature kind of runs through. It's harder to see until you zoom in, but you start to see these same features match as far as the motion that it would be going.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand. Some of it looks well. It appears to have some of the principles of what they would say would be attributed to, as you said, glaciers, and they try to use that argument for on Mars, basically, but. When I heard that they were talking about glacial evidence on Mars, I went looking because I was very interested, being someone who's from the area, that they might, one day see a iceberg going by type of thing. And lo and behold, it looked very much like there was no such events happening. I mean, that's clearly that Esker was clearly in a positive Lichtenberg. I ruled that out, and I see this other one, these drumlins, and I'm like, okay, these are a big pattern crossing this entire thing. And notice how they have that the cross hatching, but in a negative form. It's more of like a ionic wind cross hatching as opposed to a true Lichtenberg or etching, as it were. Anyway. It made me question all of these features that we've been told are glacial. Like, what do we really know? The glacial erratics, we know that they're not that anymore. We know that that's just a rock that fell from the heavens and landed there because, some current dropped it off sometime. The Finger Lakes are in New York are probably not those, all lined up because of that reason.
Another thing I can't rule out what ocean waters that would be swirling around the planet, how that could affect the landmass. and I get that from reading a bunch of Velikovsky books. Specifically, like Earth in an Upheaval. They talk about how, and you can relate this to any, a lot of mythology and other teachings too, that the Earth moved from its place, flipped upside down, heavy earthquaking and flooding and all kinds of things. So I can just imagine, even if the Earth's axis was shook off its core for just a moment, and again, I imagine, it's just me, I imagine the Earth being smaller, maybe more the size of Mars, and it getting wrenched open. Kind of you're trying to take the bottle lid off of a jar. You're trying to just wrench it open like that. What that kind of force would do to the world's oceans at the time. So then you have that paired with a giant electrical storm that's encompassing, the Earth. You got volcanoes going off, you got earthquakes, you've got intense winds everywhere, and then you have water mixing into this. I think there's so many elements to it that it's hard to nail down exactly what caused what created what. But I think at the core, I think something we all agree is that there's an electrical component to the charge of the planet and how it relates to the other bodies of the solar system. But that's something that I try to keep in mind as I look at, a view like this of, how does water naturally drain and the river systems and whatnot. So it's, was there streams or water there prior, or is some of this the result of erosion from a massive worldwide flood, as they talked about in antiquity? And then at the same time, there's supposed to be a few different major floods in past events.
Actually, so that is very true. One of the major floods apparently was not really a flood it was a flood in the sky. Because the aurora looks like water. That's why they probably, like, you might have heard the term "the waters above," and that's probably where that comes from. Where you would see so much aurora that it would just look like rippling water everywhere. Like that's what the aurora looks like, and you'd see it, except for somewhere nearer to the equator, like below 30 or something, where you'd be able to see out. And that's why the constellations along that strip are probably fairly important because of that reason.
That makes sense, because if you go to a rock show, the only way you're going to see the lights great is to put some haze in the air.
Exactly.
So I can imagine what kind of a visual show it was. I mean, obviously it was so impactful. People carved, spent lots of their life carving into the sides of mountains and painting in caves and whatnot. I recall reading something somewhere, and it was about not the natives were so creative that they made up all these things and drew animals and what their life looked like. But if I could only imagine if disaster just happened outside and I'm trying to save my life and I am stuck in a cave, what would I want to pass on to whoever finds me or whoever survives? I would want to pass on the things that I saw, the things that I did. How did I survive? Hunting and what kind of food, and also what am I seeing? How can I relate my story to somebody? And I think that's where mythology and petroglyphs and all of these legends and things get thrown by the wayside by modern day people for the most part, is because they see it as something that's made up.
Yeah,
and they can't get behind it. So
right. There's got to be an imperative behind doing anything like that, and then that's the curious. What was the imperative?
I see it as the tapestry that hangs behind everything else, and each place has cherry picked their story, but it's basically and essentially the same tale in almost everywhere around the world. Even people who profess to not having religion, so to speak, they have ancestor worship, such as in China, for example. That however, if you go right back to it, they all stem from the three emperors, which are like the three original kings of Rome, which are like the three, the I don't know, Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost or something. Whatever it is that we have this predisposition for this, the God, Mary, or sorry, God, Eve, and Adam. That one, maybe the Trinity, whatever. But there seems to be that link that comes in from the past. It's amazing stuff. This stuff here.
Yeah.
There's a there's that that thing going off in Guatemala there.
Yeah, have you seen? It's
I've seen pictures of people running away.
Heather shared it with me. It's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Oh, did you see the one from NOAA that as like the right directly above it as it's exploding, and it comes out in a spiral. It's amazing. It comes out in a spiral. It's on my Facebook. I'm on my phone, not my laptop.
Yeah.
But and I can't even actually screen that you guys are seeing, but I promise it's from yesterday on my Facebook page, and it like as it explodes out, it's this quick like spin as it goes up, and then there's also a photo of the top of it while it was going off with the lightning coming out or coming to it.
Right.
So it's like pretty interesting collection, and then also there was apparently there was like an 8-point or something off the coast of Mexico last week that was like a blurb on our local news channel this morning that somehow I missed. And then there's also a huge storm system, already category 3 or something brewing over the same area right there. Lots and lots and lots of energy happening right there.
Here, I got a link there. Put it in there.
I saw.
Oh, you got it. Yeah.
No, I don't have it. No.
No, that's right. Why am I? Dave just brought it up, right?
Well, Dave can find it. Yeah.
I just did a Google search of Guatemala volcano. Are you looking for something specific?
No, that was Dave. But this is the link from Heather's.
Mount Fuego.
Yeah. Is that the one you showed? You see it there in the chat?
Looking for the chat here.
From the up, there's a button on the upper right hand corner.
I found it. Thank you, sir.
So you have, by the way, Dave or DJ, you're. I saw it related to this. I saw the clouds basically going across the Earth, and somebody was able to map all the lightning strikes as well and put them together. Mm-hmm. And the first thing it reminded me of was Buddy's experiments across burning wood. How it would just create a ridge, and they said, "Oh, this is the low pressure ridge moving in there." It goes, wait a second. Why is the lightning occurring right along this perfect strip and then sort of bends and it kind of expands outward, which it should, because like charges repel, yada yada, and then and then you see these patterns continue. They sort of like, of course they're not. I mean, they are burning the Earth technically, but only so infrequently that it's obviously not leaving trails behind it. But still,
right.
Yeah, right here. Just very.
Yeah, this is a whole great avenue of exploration. See? They've done this with gamma rays, over a big time span, and what they interpreted as random events start showing.
See, look at that.
Interesting patterns. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Yeah, that almost, it seems to just follow that entire ridge line of that mountain system that goes. I can imagine if these were moving in a straight line, or somewhat of a straight line, but just on a more massive scale. I thought the same thing, Neil. It reminded me of buddy burning some wood.
It just
That's exactly.
we know,
which was a great show, by the way.
well, we know there is a lot of potential I mean, just daily as these cycles go around. So
yeah, there's that. Yeah.
That's very impressive.
Very cool. It's nice to have someone else fly today.
Yeah, you don't have to do it. That's
right.
Here you go. Hey, what's this? This is supposed to be some lights above a storm. Just play it and see if anything cool comes of it.
good thing about NASA. They don't copyright.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. It's like you start to, I mean, all the immense amount of investment in all their measuring devices, and then to start look at it with a new paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy,
like that.
Boy, these tie together so much more nicely, doesn't it, with this new paradigm? Yeah, it's amazing.
Like, wow, I haven't seen that. Oh, that's cool.
They're pulling it into the. I'm watching it over the last, since I've been tuned into this a little bit, but you can see them like they're pushing in the theory from all different angles because they realize. I think there's a self-realization that their model is incomplete. One might be polite about it.
It's interesting to see that the terms that they're starting to use to kind of side skirt around everything that they've been pushing versus now they're starting to introduce variations of electricity into their model.
Right.
Could dark matter be electric? That was so embarrassing.
I mean, this is
well, they
see
the currents,
your eye are up, yeah.
And they say, oh well, it seems to be responding to what else responds like this? Well, electricity responds like this.
I wouldn't pay attention to that.
Yeah,
this is nothing.
It's very maddening in a way.
Yeah, I mean, the ones that knee jerked me, and it was and they've sat there for a long time. Is junk DNA, dark matter, and dark energy. It's just the names are wrong.
I am so happy to put these. There's a list of things now that are on my you're not thinking anymore list, and it is if the answer is God did it. Yeah, it is. If God did it, if aliens did it, if millions and millions of years did it, or if I guess now someone said you should add gravity to that list because they use it to fill in all the holes.
Gravity fills in all the holes.
But we don't even understand what it is. I mean, it's just like we were talking before. What is mass then? And they were like, duh.
Like I believe in science. So.
Well, of course you have to.
It's me. I believe in science.
Well,
I you know my perspective. So.
Well, the word believe is the problem. The issue.
It's absolute. Just you're fundamentally showing your hand of cards when you say I believe in science because it's not about belief; it's about proof. Yeah.
Well, that's what I meant exactly. There's
it's evidence, and then we see it changes. So.
This is I'd love y'all's thoughts on the atmosphere. This brings up this particular clip right here. I'm seeing all of this lightning around the kind of the top head of the cones of these cloud formations that are coming up in these storms, and I've seen it. I recently saw it in a few of the hurricanes this last season where there was lightning in the core of the hurricane. And then sometimes, there's always going to be usually lightning with tornadoes, but it seems like it's very intense around the core of these storms. And I guess from your perspective, if we're looking at a vortex of being something like a Birkeland current, where you've got maybe I guess what I'm trying to say is there's the model where you have these concentric circles and the charge is in reverse as you go into the inner circles. Is that how you guys imagine some of these storms happening as far as energy going up or down these pathways? So I just seeing that lightning made me think of that.
Well, you're not wrong. There is a positive core, there's a negative outer sheath, and then there is a debris sheath, which is the third stuff that sticks to that outer core. And that outer core is mostly made of electrons. The positive charged cloud above has you can tell that tail snakes down and goes inside of the other one. So you can see that sort of finger inside of a tube effect sort of happening with those type of tornadoes. So if that's any indication, then you will have, because of the right-hand rule, this is why it's happening. So it's basically found this is a way of transferring electricity in dark mode, except it will have some interference, of course, because there's so much stuff in it. But it wants to do this now. Because of that, it's the whole nature of what it is. You're going to have basically a functioning conduit, but it will itself have a potential, like a thermopile, or like even a transformer, where you can have a flux that goes up the whole tube.
Mm-hmm.
And this could be what's generating these sprites going up, because there's so much voltage is required to actually overcome the electrical resistance to the ground, much higher than just the 500,000 volts for the ionosphere to the ground. So if that's the average pressure, or we'll call it average voltage, these things are much, much, much more electrically, have a much more higher electrical potential, which is probably why they shoot sprites right out of the center of their cores, the cells.
Mm-hmm. So it's extracting the difference from the Earth into, I guess, into what you'd say the cosmic circuit, or the Sun Earth circuit.
Well, it's making a connection to the ionosphere, but it's providing a conduit, but it also has to have more complexity. Otherwise, you wouldn't get lightning coming out of it, because it's not just a drawing up between these two potentials, because it itself has very high potentials. I love how their thermal models work.
These are great. Can you share this link in the?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just a wonderful simulation.
Absolutely. So this guy is based in Chicago, and he's got access to one of the world's supercomputers.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the types of models I've been looking at that makes me imagine the aurora, but on the ground.
Right. It's the same action. I mean, this is what's kind of showing. I mean, the one thing that kind of caught me, and I apologize for a little left field, but it's like that the top view is highly embryonic, as far as like looking at the tornado geometry there. But just you can see the high level of analysis that they put into developing that thing.
Yeah. Well, apparently with this, they've just like you've seen, what was that movie, Twister? They try to get the truck in to put all of these little devices to measure everything within the winds.
Right.
They've actually been doing that. This particular study
in real life, right?
In life, so they're actually modeling how all of the wind movements happen to be able to determine it's not just a single vortex; it's a lot of vortexes.
Sure, right. Vortices and vortices, yeah.
Yeah, trailing behind it.
Right.
Share that link with
you. Yeah. I mean, this is the same behavior we're seeing in plasma. This is where you start to see this unbroken chain of comparison, which we all look for as scientists.
Well, I'm not a scientist. I'm a generalist.
It's good. It's better to be a general. It's like I spend more of my time unlearning things than learning.
Yeah. I have just a fascination with just trying to understand everything. So I don't want to say I have any credentials to give you guys any absolutes. So I'm just a normal.
We don't. Yeah. There's not just. It's just good spirit and inquiry. That's the requirement. The requirement is inquiry. Yeah. Honest inquiry.
Right on. Yeah, I just sent you a link. They've got all kinds of great videos on there.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, this was interesting too. So this is what I had imagined. This section coming off is what's pulling from the land. If some of these instances you've got just a pressure system that's coming down that could lift material from the ground and then be added into the other portion, that's more of the mountain building process. So that's how I've seen it, is an excavation and a deposit, on either side of these storms. I've had tornadoes pass through us, and it could just be calm of day. If you were southwest of these storm formations, the wind is very light. You usually can see clear blue sky. It's beautiful. But at least in the northern hemisphere, you've got the vortex that spins around, and you've got the mass of the wind and rain and everything going along, coming up maybe the southeast side and then wrapping towards the north. And anytime you're inside of these types of storms, you just get dumped on if you're on that top edge that wraps around. At least high winds. I've been through a few tornadoes. It's pretty scary stuff.
Yeah.
But it's insane how fast the winds can go and then just immediately just drop. And then sometimes you have breaks in between these kind of squall lines that are converging together too. So it's just nice to be able to see visualizations of it finally.
Yeah, definitely. Right.
Unfortunately, he's not using he's not putting EM into his model. That's the only problem, because he has to use heat as a source, right? So. Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll get there one day.
How can you tell he's not?
Because it's not obeying the right-hand rule.
He did mention in this video
isn't he getting it from data though?
They're measuring this from devices that they've sent up in these storms. But what we don't see is what kind of charge is in the earth and then also above at a grander scale. We're just seeing just the local tornado effect.
Kinetic side.
So I think what Neil's saying is they're not considering electricity being a part of this. They're thinking of the lightning always being a component, an effect to the cause, not the cause.
Right.
And guys like
well, that would explain the speed is what I meant. I mean, you're not going to the reason it's doing what it's doing is because it's able to continually keep that speed continues going up because of the nature of plasma, not necessarily the force of wind. And plus, one of the things that you probably could tell me about, because you've been through a couple, is the feeling of weightlessness sometimes when they pass. When they remove mass from you, like somehow you are, because you saw that with that little twister that went through the football game or something, how the chair just stuck to the outside edge of it.
It's a big clue right there, Brendan.
Well, might be an electrical nature to gravity, something like that.
Well, it definitely the winds will move you. That's for sure.
That's for sure. Yeah.
I've even been in a few of the Texas twisters, just the whirlwinds, outside and something to roll through. And if you're in the middle of that, you feel that thing smack you. But if it's big enough and you're standing in the middle of one of those little whirlwinds, you feel the pressure. It's almost like it's trying to lift you up. I'm sure if I was in the center of a tornado, I'd be sucked up. But there's definitely a sense of wanting to go vertical with the winds that this generates. But if you're on the outside edge of that thing, it will blow things sideways. There's a point to where you've got a very strong sideways push, and then a point towards the inside that is an uplift. But then just on the other side of the eye wall, you've got pressure down. So you've got a downburst that converges with something that's pulling up on the other side. So it's essentially you've got, a helical or a twisting motion of two vortices. One of those appears or feels like it's pushing down, it's downward pressure, and then the other one's up. But when it merges, that's where you get this crazy storm happening. Yeah. That's the best I could describe it as.
Well, there should be, if it's a Birkeland current, it'll have multiple layers for sure.
Yeah.
And you see that.
That was particularly great.
That is quite good. But all I meant is that he's using these as data points.
Yeah.
And you can tell that he's being honest, and don't get me wrong, but there's
as an aspiring illustrator, it's like that's a good way to do it.
Right.
But you just can't to know that the rules were or to basically there's a sort of energy deficiency of the whole problem, because obviously these storms can be absolutely devastating, and they can't just be because of heat, because number one, they're freezing. The heat is removed from them even, and the rains are cold, and they're coming down, and you get these Birkeland self-reinforcing electric streams, which are magnetically coupling themselves and so forth. And
I mean, this is the filament
wonderful
idea too, by the way. Yeah. Pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, and there you can see the inner core. Look at that right there.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's Jim's filament model. It ties into all this. The other thing you start seeing is this frequency spatial thing. As it touches down, obviously that's the highest point of frequency where it's tipped, but it's touching down. And just the relative volume versus frequency, interesting relationship.
Well, that's probably where the corridor voltage potential exists. Is right where that little storm is occurring. Where the tornadoes want to come down at, there's probably reaching way on up into the cloud. There's a thermopile-like reaction, and this is where you get your potentials. Where it's if you can envision just like in the center of our galaxy, where you have a plasmoid that shoots X-rays in one direction and X-rays in the other, but in a lab that's just a plasma focus. But on Earth, that's a thunderstorm, perhaps. We're starting to see this type of understanding.
Parade of vortices.
This part on the outside wall too is, as I look at some of the geological structures across America, I see all of these kind of smaller vortice type geological structures, and I have to. Every time I look at a graphic like this, I see what's going on at the major area, but then it's, what could have this been producing along other portions as well? So there's a lot to look at on the Earth, obviously. This just makes me look at it a little bit differently, seeing this type of, movement of air, or you could correlate this with water too. A whirlwind might act similar to this as well. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. A whirlpool.
A whirlpool. Yes, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
We do have a few of those here because we have some rivers that reverse. So.
And if we can have storms of this size, of giant F5 tornadoes and Cat 4 hurricanes, what would it be like if there was, obviously a lower gravity? If the world was smaller at one point in time, if there was these gigantic electrical discharges from the passing of Venus, or if the Saturnian model was correct and we were actually aligned with Saturn before Earth started pulling that arrangement, at some point in time, those potentials would have to cross over to create a different charge on the Earth. And I could just imagine the scale of what kind of lightning storms or whatever you want to call it at that point would appear on Earth, with the world just going through this crazy shock, if you will.
I would have no doubt that it, even right into Roman times, a thunderstorm would be a serious issue.
Yeah.
There are tales of Roman ships being blown to smithereens just outside of Portus. They would set sail from Rome, and a bolt from the blue would come down and hit their mast and blow the ship to pieces.
Wow.
So that was an event, that happened. So it doesn't happen today very often. St. Elmo's fire was known about. So that's a perfect example of something that probably happened a lot more across the surface of the Earth, but storms themselves have the advantage of being over flat water, more or less, and the ship being the tallest thing for miles and miles around. So
I saw the other day too the fissure that's opened up in Hawaii. There was fire coming out of that, and there was I guess it was creating a vortex going up above it, so it created a fire tornado.
Yes.
Did you see that?
I've seen fire tornadoes before, especially, actually, it's very common with sulfur, which is why I was not really surprised. Sulfur goes with volcanoes like peanut butter and jelly, so.
So that made me think, there's just another thing to add. If, during the times they talked about where there was a conflagration across the world, and after this event, man couldn't even light a fire, to where there was so much fire in the sky during one of these events that it's literally melting things. But if you've got, I imagine the Aurora Borealis, they're high in the atmosphere, as far as I could tell. I've never seen them in person. I've only watched videos, but they're high in the atmosphere. And that's the ionized particles we're receiving from the sun around the poles. But when we get extreme solar weather, it seems like the aurora are pushed down or squashed towards the equator a little bit more. Sometimes they'll come down into the states. You can see them in the upper states. But I think back in the 1800s, there was an event with the sun to where they saw it all the way down into Texas.
The Carrington event.
Carrington event. It mentioned that yesterday, too, by the way.
There you go. Sure. So if events like that can squash our atmosphere, and we've got connections like this to where we've got the potential of the Earth and the potential of the atmosphere above, is it possible that the cold of space could be squashed down to touch the Earth at the same time in some of these extreme events? And that's where I guess I'm trying to paint this picture of, if you've got a fiery hot heat, and maybe it's molten dust, it's very hot dust from volcanoes exploding or whatever event's going on, and you've got some sort of wall or sheet of ionized plasma that has the cold from space touching down to the ground, and you've got this hot and cold, you've got almost a welding environment, is what I'm trying to imagine.
Right.
Does that sound sensible?
Well, you're okay. Let's see.
I'm not sure how to describe it in electrical terms.
You're not wholly wrong. To adjust where the aurora is, where the major currents enter and exit the sun or the Earth, is a frequent. It has to do with the conditions of the Earth itself, like its constituency, and the amount of current and flux that it has, and the balance between the two. So if we just turned a knob and the moon wasn't around and just changed it a little bit, we could have rings. Kristen Birkeland learned just we'd just been in the laboratory. Okay, if I turn the current up a bit more, it starts going, because it starts going from from dark mode to arc to glow mode to arc mode, and these characteristics are laughably nonlinear. So if a little change in something will change something else, and instead of the atmosphere being compressed, what's actually being compressed is the ionosphere. And the reason that it can't touch the ground is because the reason it doesn't touch the ground now is that there is if it could, it would. So the surface is negative. The ionosphere is being repelled by an internal positive. So it can only get so close, and it just sits there. So the thing is, though, is that these laws for this capacitor are finite. So the amount of charge on the plates, the voltage between the two plates will determine, and of course some constants and other things like that, will determine the distance between the two plates. So if you have a higher voltage, they'll be further apart. But since we know they're about 500,000 volts, if we drop, say, whatever the amount of coulombs there is now and times it by, say, 1,000. So we put a lot more charge, basically immerse the Earth in a lot bigger charge, like more mass from the sun, more plasma from the sun is going by the Earth, perhaps, at this moment, whatever. Then the ionosphere would react by going closer to the Earth. That's just the rules. So it would also draw up the underground ionosphere, the negative ionosphere, and that would pull up, and obviously that would create some inductance, which could create earthquakes and so on, and move lava around and all this other wonderful stuff. So, because lava is a conductor. If this is what you're looking at, if this is the kind of thing that's going on, then your potential issue with regards to these currents then would that they would still be there. These loops that we talked about earlier would still be there. These cells, they would just be compressed now, and they would have more power. So it could be a very interesting time indeed. The entire sky could be a wash of lights, and they could have lived in that and perfectly normal, They were always trying to build something higher to touch heaven, type of thing. God knows. I'm just speculating, of course.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Did Teddy hold?
Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt. That's just a striking band through there.
Can
Water
you hear me?
erosion. No. Anyway, go. Yes, Robert, go ahead.
Hear me?
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
I was talking. Didn't Ted Holden talk about that even in the biblical terms? That right before the Great Flood, that there was 7 days of lights in the sky. That could have been like that star water reaction that brought down shit tons of water.
Well, it could also have been just we were just shifting orbits, and then our V's versus I's were wrong, and then we started acting all funny. I don't really know. I'm just. But he did talk about that. Yeah.
I got to go. You're bringing me to Australia here quickly.
Yeah.
I got to look at this.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty amazing, yeah.
Yeah, so this kind of reminds me much more smaller scale, the Ricat structure.
Yeah.
So, we've got this mound thing going on here beside all of this stuff that's going on. And you've got these crazy looking
amazing, right?
beds, right?
Just
and
like
then,
on Europa.
Yeah. And then you have these buildups right beside it that follow along in that pattern.
And they seem to have a leeward and windward side as well, as Michael Steinbacher was always quick to point out. That shows direction.
How far does that thing go? I mean, because there's
it circles the whole globe.
No, but I mean that one.
I'm just kidding.
Feature,
I don't know.
I know.
Being a jerk.